But it's starting, recording, almost ready. Okay, now we're recording. So getting back to you, as we said before, we're amateurs here. I'm talking to Kate Sanders, who was recently interviewed by the press inside the Rochester media bubble. And they filtered her remarks to such an extent that she's gone on social media to talk about it. And I just like to say that, we're amateurs. Again, we don't have subscribers. We're not part of corporate media. The local affiliate stations are members of large corporations, multi-billion dollar corporations. They would be able to host in-depth interviews such as this one with persons such as yourself, who are obviously articulate. They could have these conversations and do this. And we're about to go into CRT. And please don't forget to, or not CRT, but comprehensive sex ed, but don't forget to circle back, if you will, to cover the other issues about your interview with the official corporate media. So go ahead, Kate Sanders, a homeschooler. Please go ahead and speak to your experience.
Yeah, well, I think where we left off, Wes, was we were talking about parents being present and accessible to kids as they encounter material that may make them uncomfortable. And comprehensive sex ed is precisely that. It's something that could and often does make kids uncomfortable. And it really needs to be the parents' responsibility to drive that bus. Now, I will say, I'll give a shout out here to the parents that are really afraid to talk to their kids about these things. And in most cases, that's because they weren't talked to about it at a young age. And so, or their parents were awkward about talking with them about it. So they're afraid to talk to their kids. And I would say to those parents, there are resources available to you to help have those conversations in a healthy way. And, again, I don't want to give the illusion here that I'm a perfect parent, because I am far from it. But this is something, given what's going on in the schools and in the culture, this is a topic that was particularly important to me and my husband, or is particularly important. Our oldest is 10, and we felt that she was mature enough to start having some more in-depth conversations about these things. And, we did some research and we asked around to other families that we trust, and we found a really great book series that dove into those from a similar worldview to ours. And I sat down with my daughter and I just said, sweetie, I am so excited that you are growing up, that you are turning into a young woman. I'm so excited. And there are great things ahead for you. And I would just love to read this book with you and to talk about that, because I'm excited for you. And she just lit up. She lit up and she said, yes, Mom, let's do that. So every Friday afternoon, we took an hour together. We'd read a chapter, we'd snuggle up together and we'd read a chapter of that book and we'd just talk about it. How does that make you feel? What do you think? Do you have any questions? Yes, this part might be hard. Getting your period might be hard and uncomfortable, but it's such a privilege to be a woman. It's such a privilege to be able to someday carry a life. This is an exciting thing. And you know what, Wes? She was fine with it. She wasn't uncomfortable at all. Now, inside, I was feeling uncomfortable because I'm one of those kids who, I did not have a lot of these conversations with my parents. They did the best they could, and they're wonderful. My parents are amazing. They didn't know how to do this either. And so it was my responsibility, because I'm the adult, to have control of my feelings and my discomfort and not project that onto my child. And we were able to have a very fruitful and encouraging conversation, and an ongoing conversation about this. Now, if I put my child in public school and I allowed those teachers to control that conversation, that would have gone so differently. And I can almost guarantee you my child would have come out of that confused and embarrassed.
Embarrassed and feeling a sense of shame. And then also, if you consider the pop culture inputs in the public school, the pop culture having, WAP as its hit last year, right? And the Hollywood approach to everything, or the Disney approach to everything, that that nature abhors a vacuum. If the parent's not having that conversation, all of those other worldviews will rush in to fill the void and end up transmitting a sense of shame. I don't think it's okay to have that going on with complete strangers. And I think it should be the parents who have those conversations with their children, because let's face it, there are people with an agenda that they don't feel comfortable explaining themselves. And when they're challenged on it, they're unable to explain it. Or when they do finally turn up at a school board meeting and they're recorded saying what they want to do with other people's kids and teach them about all these matters that are deeply personal and private and should be done in a respectful way. When they say what they're reading to kids and they're recorded and then that's uploaded, they tend to disappear. They tend to vanish because nobody really agrees with what they're doing.
Yeah.
Leave other parents' kids alone.
Right. Well, and what happens when we have a conversation about really intimate things like that? That affects a relationship. And when a parent takes that on and has that conversation with their child, it's going to build trust and it's going to build an openness in the relationship. It's going to help those kids feel like they can talk to their parents about anything. And then down the line, when they're 17, 18, 20, 25 years old, and they're running into things in the world that were unexpected and hard and emotional and scary, where are they going to go? They're going to know they can go to their parent. And the parent is the one consistent thing, it's the consistent person in their life. That is how that relationship's meant to be. When they're having that conversation, not with the parents, when they're having it with their teachers, suddenly you're adding an element of relational intimacy to a relationship that is not meant to have that relational intimacy. In fact, I'm sorry, but as a parent, that's really scary to me.
Yeah.
Because what happens when your child feels like they can start talking to someone who's basically a stranger about sex and they can't talk to you? I'm not calling all teachers groomers, but we need to consider for a second what we're setting our kids up for. Even if nothing happens in school, what does that mean in the future? What effect is this going to have down the line?
Right. And it speaks to some of the surveys which have been distributed by the government in Rochester, not just the Parks Board shouldn't be asking people for their gender preferences. The Rochester Public Schools sends out a survey and then they're asking kids to, report on their own identities. It's just bizarre to think that governmental agencies want to soften people up to the point where they can be asked these questions in a public setting and the data can be harvested. It's really nobody's business. And you should leave it usurps, it crosses a line between public and private life that is continually being eroded by governmental authorities. So if you reach out to children and you get, soften them up to be asked these kinds of questions by an agent of the government, and the teacher is an agent of the government to an extent. They're operating. They're also, parenti in absentia type aspect to what they do, but they shouldn't be encroaching on what is, private space and getting people used to being asked these kinds of questions.
Right.
But
well, it's
we have to think
fascinating.
there's activists in the media. There's activists who are, like you mentioned, Black Lives Matter in the first segment, and their intended goal is to destroy the nuclear family. Something the Black community needs right now is a stable nuclear family. And if Black people in the Rochester Public Schools would look at that, the BLM's own doctrines at the highest levels, but they look at that and ask themselves, are you better off with single family units? Are you better off when your kids are in chaos, there's no father in the home? Don't you want to turn that around? I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you.
No, I think you nailed it when you mentioned stability. The kids need stability, and it's our job as parents to offer that to them. Now, yes, there are circumstances outside of our control. I have a very good friend going through a divorce that was a result of circumstances that were out of her control, and she's taking that step for the safety of herself and her children. So I get it. And stability, though, can look like a lot of different things. And when our kids are constantly going back and forth to distance learning, and when they're being told things in schools that are contrary to the values that their parents are teaching them, that's not stability. Not only that, but what I was going to say, it really floors me that this idea of consent is such a big talking point, right? Consent.
Right.
We're supposed to teach our kids about consent. I'm sorry, but no child in the schools right now is consenting to these sex conversations.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to try to teach your kids that they need to give consent to be touched. They need to give consent to be spoken to in a sexual manner. And then you're going to send them to a school where you expect them to be okay having all of this thrown at them because they don't have a choice. They don't have a choice in this matter. That just boggles.
Why should they be peppered with any kind of overt initiatives at all in a public school settings? They shouldn't be put in a position where they're being asked to give consent. That's just bizarre. If you drop your kid off at the schoolyard, you don't expect them to have to stave off endless it's like public shaming again. It's like it's grooming. It's also hey, why are you saying no? Are you a racist? Why won't you consent to be my girlfriend? Is your dad a racist? Is your mom a racist? I actually heard some of those conversations on Rochester radio stations. I don't want to repeat it, but there's actually a big push right now, and it's bizarre. So do you want to say, like, did you talk to the reporter, the one who this reporter put out the invite for parents to speak? You went forward and you participated, and then you weren't lied about in terms of what you said, but there were omissions of what you said. So in a sense, the omission of your concerns was a kind of a cover up, or it's kind of a lie about what you actually said, because what you were trying to say was a plethora of issues. It's school violence, it's CRT, which they deny they're doing. They deny they're doing CRT. It's like, well, we know that the theory drives the practice. We know you're not teaching, the higher level French philosophers, the Hegelian dialectic. We know you're not teaching overtly Maoist, communist doctrinaire, but a lot of that doctrine drives your practice. So they ended up cutting out your aspect of comprehensive sex ed as well. Any other things that were omitted from the interview that corporate media should have reflected in their report?
Yeah, generally speaking, you touched on most of it right there, but I did tell her the school administrators, the school board, they are trying to cover this up, and parents are trying to have this conversation with them. They are trying to get them to change, like you said, speaking up at these school board meetings, but being limited to, what is it, like 3 minutes is all they're allowed to speak. And then that's not televised. The public's not hearing about this. You have parents that are writing, emailing, calling the district, asking for an explanation. And then I've seen some of the responses that some of these parents have gotten, these cryptic responses that either dance around it and won't answer the question, or deny that it's happening, or even worse, they try to justify it in the name of diversity, equity, and equality, or equality, excuse me.
Not equality, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Inclusion, there we go.
Yeah.
So parents, I told her, I said, parents are trying to address this, and the district won't have it. That's a problem. So, that's certainly something that she didn't report on. And when she asked me, is there anything else you want me to know today? I said, Sydney, tell the truth. You have an opportunity here. Tell the truth. These parents need to be heard. These parents are concerned. The community needs to know that this is going on. So many community members are in denial. They don't want to hear it. You know, I get into it with people on Facebook sometimes. In fact, some of the people watching this have probably seen my name come up on some of Kim Norton's posts. And somebody called me.
I haven't, because I'm blocked from seeing what you post on Kim Norton's wall. She used a really unique way of preventing people from seeing that there's opposition to her. So a lot of us, if you're not, I think it works like this: if you're not friends with each other on Facebook already, you can't see what someone's posting on her wall. So not everyone sees the amount of energy that's coming against her. But, you know, she meets regularly with Kent Peckle, and people have a right to ask what those meetings are about and request to have transcripts, because she's a public servant. So, but we also know that the Rochester Public Schools, with Mr. Munoz, Mayor Norton helped coordinate the Black Lives Matter protests, which occurred in Rochester, and that she was a proponent of those. And it was at the height of the lockdown. But let's not go off into the woods.
Well,
I want to look back. Maybe we didn't talk about violence in the public schools yet, because there's a lot. We see some of the behaviors at the parking lot at the Apache Mall, or in the parking lot in front of Shields department store, or at the fairgrounds last summer. A topic I spoke about: a student had been bullied in school for 3 or 4 years. The parents tried to communicate with the teacher and the principal, and the public schools were just kind of keeping it under the lid. Then the girl was jumped at the Olmsted County Fairgrounds, and the perpetrators were actually spitting on law enforcement and knocking over trash cans. And there was kind of a massive kind of incident at the fairgrounds where they had to cancel the Olmsted County Fair. And I spoke about that on the microphone, and I was pilloried and vilified. But what do you think about violence, and what can parents do about that? How can they speak out?
There are probably other people that could speak more to that subject than I can. I know it's happening. I've heard stories about specific incidents. I have heard about kids being afraid to use the restroom at school.
Yes.
Because they're afraid they will get jumped in the restroom. I mean, try to imagine holding your pee all day because you're afraid to go to the bathroom. Like, that's going to be effective for learning, you know, let alone just the anxiety. I mean, think about how your body responds when you're about to head into a situation where you are in danger to any degree. That fight, flight, or freeze mode kicks in, and all you're thinking about is how to protect yourself. So I'm not going to be able to learn about World War II when I'm afraid of getting beat up. I mean, so, and again, like, my area of expertise, so to speak, is homeschooling. And I really believe, now I'm not anti-school. I don't think it would be accurate to say that I'm anti-school. The problem is when these things start happening and nothing is done about it. And RPS is not doing anything about it. They're not willing to admit that it's a problem. They're not willing to work with parents. They're not willing to put systems and consequences in place for these kids that will protect the student body. And so, as far as I'm concerned, the answer here is to homeschool. The answer here is to pull your kids out. First of all, parents need to know that if you make that decision now, that doesn't mean it has to be forever. But if we want to get RPS to realize that there is a problem, you need to pull your kids out, because I'm convinced at this point that that's the only way we're ever going to get their attention. And even then, you know, they're coming up with other BS excuses for why people are pulling their kids out. They're not willing to admit that they're the problem.
They really haven't responded to any of the, I mean, when somebody speaks on the microphone and says that children were sharing TikTok videos of abuse on the school buses, or abuse in the schoolyard, or children were filming stuff and sharing it on social media, and a parent speaks to that, that kind of issue that's brought up is a matter for the entire community. It's really not just for parents. It's not just for taxpayers. It's for people who don't own property in Rochester. It's for investors in Rochester who have businesses. It's for insurance companies who are worried about actuarial tables in Rochester. If we've got school children who are renting Airbnb houses and then there's a shootout at 2 o'clock in the morning, as happened last summer, that's an issue for the entire community. It's not,
Yes.
we see a lot of this stuff. So let's talk about some of the numbers, the sheer numbers of students who've left the Rochester Public Schools, because the numbers are quite high and it's astonishing right now. And we don't really have the accurate figures on that. Some of us have numbers here and there, but
Yeah.
are you in tune with any of that data? I mean, even in a peripheral kind of way.
Yeah, I can tell you for certain that there is at least 750 homeschooled students in Rochester. So if you think about that, that's not counting, and we know that because we called the district and asked. And they gave us that number without hesitation. But that 750 is not including the kids who are open enrolled. There are parents enrolling their children in other districts, Stewartville, Byron, Casson. It's happening a lot. That's not including the students that have gone to private schools instead. That's not including the families that have moved out of Rochester to put their kids in a different school district. That's radical.
Byron, for
radical
example.
step.
There's a flight to Byron, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, like we're talking well over 750 students that have been, removed or whose parents have chosen. Like I do talk to a lot of parents whose oldest is in preschool or kindergarten, so they're about to start putting their kids in school, and now we're saying, hold on, what would I be entering my child into? Which is, good for them for having that insight now, because we need to remember, once kids enter into that environment and are exposed to these things, they can't be unexposed. Mm-hmm. So anyway, like this is, again, it's not even counting the number of families that would be putting their kids in this coming fall and are choosing not to, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's the other thing that the school district hasn't been very forward about, is how, well, the story touched on it a little bit last night on the news, how they're not reaching projected enrollment anymore. So, going forward, I think the numbers they're sharing with us are very, very conservative and borderline lie.
We heard that in the first year of the COVID lockdown, there were probably 1,000 parents. It reached the upper 900s of people who walked away from the Rochester Public Schools. And then there were, in the second year, I think I lost track around December or January. As of that point, I think we were at about 600, 650. And how I think that's a detriment and a loss to the whole community is that communities are out of balance when you have too much of maybe one age group. So in Rochester, we're a very old community. There's lots of boomers here, right? So and when you get to the age of 70, you see this the numbers just go up massively, because there's a lot of retirees that move to Rochester. They want to be close to the Mayo Clinic. There's these new apartment buildings that are elder kind of retirement centers or assisted living facilities and so on. So the community is sort of out of balance, and a healthy community would have a broad swathe of people of different age groups in it. So yeah, there's a lot of flight going on away from Rochester, and the public schools tried to do a survey to discover the reasons why people were leaving, but the questions were asked in such a way that they were kind of protecting the public from seeing the responses that people would have given if the questions had been more honest. I don't know if you saw that survey, but they asked some loaded questions because they were afraid of finding out the real reasons that parents were leaving the Rochester Public Schools and taking their kids out.
Right. Well, and that's because they don't want the truth. They don't want that data. They don't want the data that is going to confirm what they're afraid of. They want the data that's going to fit their narrative so that they can report back to the community what they want us to know, not what we need to know. And again, that's a problem. The lack of transparency. Again, I am not anti-school. I am anti, why can't I get the information I want? Why can't we see the curriculum? Why can't we reach the superintendent? Why don't we get emails back? That's what I have a problem with.
Yeah.
So these surveys, this data, it's nobody can get accurate information.
It's so funny that they call it the Rochester Public Schools, but the only thing that's public about it is the money they take from us. There's nothing public about the curriculum. There's nothing public about the numbers or the data. They don't want us to know how they spent the Federal CARES Act money or the COVID relief money they received. All of that's they say it's online, but when you go look at it, it's aggregate reports. It's not in detail. So that's a whole nother topic for another a day. But the media, the corporate media conglomerates in Rochester would certainly have the bandwidth to be able to host interviews such as this with parents. If this person's going to go through the trouble to ask parents to reach out to her and speak to her as a journalist, as a reporter, you could do an hour-long session with a parent and let them talk and let them tell of their experience. You could easily do that. They've got the money. That's their job, incidentally, right?
Yep.
And we're just, we're just amateurs at this. So, I mean, you're not an amateur at homeschooling. You're a professional. You're really someone who's doing it. So,
well, and
kudos.
that's just the thing is I'm a professional parent.
Yes.
All of us are professional parents. So this crap about, oh, well, you don't know what's best for your child. Yeah,
Leave it to experts, right? We're here
I
from
don't
the
need
government.
a degree in child psychology to know that what they're teaching is harming kids. I know that because the parents know that because these kids come home and the parents see the effects. They see what happens when the child's able to breathe and let their guard down a little bit and feel the feels. Because that doesn't happen in the schools. The kids don't have the space to do that because they're afraid of how people are going to respond if they let themselves respond to what they're feeling.
You're bringing up a really important point, and I just want to make a plug, but I had a conversation last week with a really great guy in the Rochester Public Schools, a guy I had always respected, although I hadn't met him. And we had a real heart-to-heart talk. And he's determined that he's going to start trying to encourage parents to have these talks with kids after school. He's going to talk to his community and say, listen to your kids, talk to your kids, let them tell you their stories, and let them open up to you. And parents, if you see this message, don't interrogate your kid, but you know how to talk to your kid. Let them speak to you in that true safe space, in what should be the best safe space they have, which is their home, in your presence, and bring them in and say, hey kid, you mean the world to me. Just tell me what you went through today at school. Just tell me about your day. What happened in your life today? Let yourself hear.
One thing I hope he touches on when he does that, because I think that's beautiful. I think that's amazing. And it needs to happen. But an important aspect about that I've found in my parenting experience is we need to be appropriately transparent with our children too. So vulnerability. We don't need to put on a front that we've got all our shit together, excuse my French, but our kids need to know our kids need to know that we wrestle through this stuff too, that we have bad days too. So sometimes when I notice that my child is having a very emotional response to something and she's just shut down to me and will not talk to me, sometimes I'll just say, you know what, honey, I'm having a hard day today too. In fact, somebody said something to me that was really, really mean and hurtful, and I'm angry. And when I feel angry, I want to yell at them and I want to say nasty things back. And I'm having to have self-control right now, which is really hard for me. And you know what? Nothing opens a child up more than knowing, whoa, what I'm feeling is normal. And even grown-ups have these feelings. That will open the floodgates. Suddenly, children are going to feel safe. They're going to feel like they can relate to you. They're going to feel like they're not being judged, because these kids, they're confused. They're confused about their feeling. And that's childhood in general, right? Like some days
Certainly,
I'm
but
like,
if you're in a school setting and you witness a child commit an act of violence against another child, and then the teacher doesn't or the child who committed the grievance isn't disciplined, or there's this endless trauma in the classroom because somebody's wilding. You know what I mean by wilding, right? The moving around causing chaos, right?
yep,
And the kids are witness to that. That can be really traumatic. Endorphins in the brain that are released will prevent children from learning. The dendrites aren't being formed in the neurons, so to speak. Memories aren't being created except for the presence of this trauma and this fear, right? And you get this traumatic stress syndrome going on. And when there's these kids being taken out by an ambulance, and then the parents are offered like no explanation about what happened in the schools that day, but all the kids know that something happened, and
yeah.
you leave it up to the parents to try to interview their kids about what happened. That there should be a better community response than letting kids see something on the news.
Amen. Absolutely. And I've been through trauma in my life. We've all been through trauma.
Me as well.
And I've done, still doing trauma work through therapy. And one of the things I have learned is the danger of chronic invalidation. And what I mean by that is when you're experiencing something emotional, traumatizing, and the people around you are either telling you that's not a big deal, you shouldn't feel that way, get over it, any list of responses. When we're told this, all it
Yes.
does is reinforce the trauma. There's no room for healing. There's no room for creating healthy emotional regulation. Like, and I'm not a psychologist, and that's getting
No.
into this territory. I'm only speaking from my personal experience. So we need to, what I've learned through my trauma and the way people responded to my trauma is that I need to be validating my kids' emotional experiences. And that means listening without judgment. And when that happens in the schools, when they witness these acts of violence and nothing is done about it, that is one epic invalidation to these kids, which is just another layer of trauma. And so now we're caught in this cycle of causing harm to our kids. And it's a
Yes.
distraction, and it doesn't allow them to be able to regulate and calm down to a point where they can learn, because that's essentially what we're talking about here, right? Is education and learning. And so it doesn't matter how good the textbooks are. It doesn't matter how good of a teacher the teacher is. The child can't learn.
Could I say what you're describing about the child not being able to learn, and how they'll be, in a sense, kind of gaslit by this constant experience of told that what they're going through isn't valid, or what they're thinking or feeling isn't valid, or you just need to accept that that's the way it's going to be. Oh, what, this behavior over here? No, the teacher should be stopping that, the school administration, or have the parents come in and help. But that gaslighting on the individual, if you take that as a microcosm of what's been happening in our whole community for the last couple of years, we're all under this sort of massive, um, uh, how can I say it, kind of a mass hysteria, or a kind of massive
Mhm.
psychosis, where everybody's in denial about the abuse that our community is suffering. And I'm not going to get into that word, because then the video will be banned and dropped from YouTube, but it's on BitChute anyway, because that new channel's going. I think this whole conversation, though, Maybe I'll read out what it says on my t-shirt, because it's what we're talking about, ironically, today. In this house, we believe that simplistic platitudes, trite tautologies, and semantically overloaded aphorisms are poor substitutes for respectful and rational discussions about complex issues. So we're into 35 minutes, but I'd like to give you the final word and let you say the farewell and the goodbye. So you got the last.
Thanks. Well, and I want to bring it back to homeschooling, because again, that's my area of expertise, so to speak. And I just want the parents who are watching this to know that you're going through trauma too. You're going through hard things too. And we need to be together as families to work through this. And you have an opportunity to be there for your children in a very unique capacity, in a way that no one else is capable of doing, because these are your children. And so step up to that challenge, and know that as you step up out to that challenge, you don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to be able to do it perfectly, because there are people in Rochester who can support you, people like me, people like the other veteran homeschool parents. There are therapists, like, okay, therapy is awesome. I'm sorry. I have no shame in people knowing that I've gone to therapy for a long, long, long time. When we take care of ourselves, when we learn how to manage our own emotions, we can help our kids do the same. So what we're talking about here goes far beyond the scope of academics. What we're talking about here is our influence as parents and our opportunity to love on our kids and be beside them. So do it. I just want you parents to know you can do this. You can do it imperfectly. You can struggle your way through it, and your kids are still going to be better off for it, even when you screw up. So I just want these parents to know you have an opportunity, and there are people here to support you, and keep fighting. I also want to put a plug in, because a lot of homeschoolers, if you're watching this and you're already a homeschooler, a lot of us feel a temptation to just completely unplug from all of this, to say, that's it. I pulled my kids out because I don't want to deal with it, so I want nothing to do with it anymore. But you know what? It does matter. It should still matter to you, because these are the kids that your kids are going to grow up and be in the world with, first off. Second, you're a taxpayer. And there's going to be an election coming up where there are 4 seats open for the Rochester Public School District School Board. And so please, please, please educate yourself on the candidates. There are some really amazing humans that are running for school board. So educate yourselves, and please vote and stand up for these kids that are still in the school district. Stand up to see your money spent well, and stand up to help your kids have people to walk life with that are well educated and well cared for. So parents, you matter.
Thank you very much, Kate
Yeah,
Sanders. And I hope this is the beginning of several more conversations on these topics.
Absolutely. Me
So
too.
important for the future. Thank you.
Right. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.